there's no right and wrong architecture. There's no right and wrong solution. Every architecture and solution has pros and cons. And that's the discussion you should be talking about. It's not about my solution is better than yours. It's about the pros and cons of your solution and how that is better for this problem than anything else.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. This is Daliana Liu. I'm a senior data scientist and a host of this podcast. Today, we have Muazma Zahid. She's a leader in data and AI, speaker and researcher in biomedical engineering with several international publications and awards. She started her career as a data warehouse consultant and later joined Microsoft in 2018 as a data engineer. Later become a senior manager in software engineering, and now she's a principal product manager. She is an advocate for diversity and inclusion. She's the president of Pakistani Women in Computing. She also won the Mentor of the Year award in 2020 by Women in Tech Network. Today, we'll talk about various of data roles she holds, machine learning in healthcare, how to scale machine learning solutions, ML ops, and her best career to her mentees. And if you have been enjoying the show, subscribe to the channel and give me a 5-star review. Welcome to the show, Muazma.
Thank you so much, Daliana, for hosting me. I'm really excited to talk to you today, discuss my career journey, and hope this is a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And this is also a coincidence. We didn't plan this, but we're recording this during Women History Month and also the week of International Women's Day. So it's a great way to celebrate us. Can you tell us how did you get into data science?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I've been in this industry for about 15 years now, which is a really long time for a woman in tech. When I graduated out of college back in 2006, my research project was actually a data science project. It was a healthcare related tachyarrhythmia detection system. Back then, data science was not a buzzword. It was not taken in the industry as something that everybody was learning or going after. And there were not really many roles in the industry calling themselves as data scientists. So I started my career as a traditional data warehousing kind of consultant and working with Teradata from Pakistan in their EMEA team. I'm originally from Pakistan as a first-generation immigrant to the US. So my career started off using my research to figure out how to publish that research because I won several awards that year because of the accuracy of that model, which was very basic at that time. It was just using a wavelet-based transform to detect these kind of arrhythmias, which is the most common way of how folks can end up having a heart attack. So the cure was available, but detection was not available. So it was a big deal at that point to find a algorithm. Actually, developed 4 algorithms to develop those to detect those. So I started a job in the data warehousing industry, but at the same time started to look at like, how can I publish this model? How can I get like the research published? How can I get the industry to understand this? And it started as a side hustle. So I started publishing my research, started going to conferences, starting doing a lot of like learning from the folks in the industry, especially in biomedical field, because my undergraduate was actually in computer science. So I had to learn a lot from that. So that's how I kind of started my career in data. It was kind of accidental that my research was in that area. And then over the years, I stick with it. I basically stuck with it since then. I have been in the same industry. I have lived and worked in like 5 different countries and 3 different continents. Worked with different types of problems in healthcare, in financial industry, in defense, and a lot of these other places, and recently into space as well. So worked with Azure Space Team. So that's been my career, and I can definitely go into more details of how and what I learned in different parts. That's how I started.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a very exciting journey. Let's start with your research in healthcare and bioengineering. Can you tell us a little more about the project you're involved in? I know at that time you mentioned that the detection was a challenge. So how did you approach the problem?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the problem that I was solving was basically it started with the heart arrhythmias, understanding different heart arrhythmias, how those happen. So we met with a local hospital, which was one of the top hospitals in the country, and we understood that there was cure available for a certain type, which is a ventricular tachyarrhythmia. So heart is divided into two major portions, right? So ventricular tachyarrhythmia is one of the most common form of heart attacks or heart arrhythmias, irregularity in your heart. Now, the cure was available, but the detection was so late, like by the time you can detect it, you're so late to be cured
Mhm.
that you can't really solve the problem. So, this was an interesting problem to look at. And at that point, I started to look around what are the different solutions available. So, I couldn't find anyone who was doing research in this. I did find a lot of people doing research overall in terms of other problems and trying to solve it in some other ways. So that's how kind of it started with the problem set. Now, the biggest problem in the healthcare industry is the regulation. So the data itself is not readily available. So that was again going back in 2006, 2005 timeframe.
Yeah.
Even more harder to kind of find open source data with these problems. So I started. I remember writing this email to like 250 different folks, whoever I could find on the internet who was doing something related to it, saying that, do you have any data set? Do you have anything that I can work on? And then out of those 200 plus people, I think six folks responded. And out of the six folks, one of them was a lead from the American Heart Institute, which had some data on it. And they kind of took a bet and they said, yeah, we will share the data with you anonymized. You can work on this, and we can go from there. So I started looking at the data set, started looking at the problem, started looking at different approaches to solve that problem. Neural networks were not a terminology back then; like they were there, it was there, but were not advanced enough
Mhm.
to do the things that you can do with them today, right? So I looked at like some very basic solutions. How can I solve that problem? So I ended up using wavelet transforms, and then a very basic kind of neural net, you will say, with few layers to solve that problem. And I even tried some basic methods like regression and classification just to see how things work, like very basic stuff, right? So I ended up with a few formulation, and with a very few kind of few months into it, I was we were a team of four actually. We were able to solve that problem with much higher accuracy, which was available at that time, which was around I think 60% at that time. So we were able to solve it about 70 some percentage, which was huge, which
Mhm.
is about
Yeah.
15% above the market. So we were shocked. Like, first of all, I wasn't sure if the results were correct. I went back many times.
Mhm.
I got a new data set, just to the testing data set, went through that. So that was really interesting, kind of learning again, just again, going back, not many tools were available. We were literally using MATLAB. All the latest like TensorFlows and whatnot, like they were not there yet, right? So it was very exciting that we were able to get that some with very basic setup, very interesting results. So we started with those models and then like kept working on different iterations of four of those, and then improved the accuracy up to 85%, which was huge.
Mhm.
So I think that's how I kind of went on with that model. We did looked at like then once we had the results, I went back to a bunch of folks to ask for more data. Right, again, data was a problem because I had a limited data set to test on and limited data set to train on. The more data you get, the more accurate you can get. There were a lot of other hypotheses I wanted to test, but unfortunately, it took me some while to get to them. For example, I wanted to see correlation with smoking, correlation with other kind of obesity, other things, and then again with healthcare industry, it's very hard to get that kind of data. And even if you get that, it's anonymized, so you can't relate. So if I get a data about you and I get data about your EKG, I cannot tell that you are the same person. So that was an interesting kind of data engineering problem to solve. What is the uniqueness and how to do that? So yeah, we worked on it very hard, and that, and then at the end of my kind of degree, my research, we published those numbers, and that got picked up by European Medical Association, a few other places. Published those research in several conferences. kind of presented my work, it got picked up. We got a patent actually with that. And then right now, that algorithm is actually one of those algorithms is used around EKG machines around the world to detect heart attacks. So, God forbid, if you go today to one of these emergency centers or somewhere else where they're taking your EKG, there can be a pop up that shows up that says that you have certain kind of accuracy that you have a chance to actually get that. And then it's up to the doctor to take the decision if he or she wants to get you through another test or something else. So that's the journey of that solution. We got adoption into one of the biggest medical supplier company that currently uses it. It is deployed on a cloud provider. Because of legal reasons, I can't take all of the names, but it's currently used at a large scale. So now what I'm doing is from time to time, I just go and retrain the model with the latest data. I look at anomalies, I look at some of the additional stuff, I make sure that it's still up and running. There are certain errors from time to time that I might have to go into and look at, but it's pretty stable for a while, and like they have an engineering team who takes care of it. So that's the journey of that particular research and what happened after that.
Yeah, that's very exciting, and sounds like it has provided great impact in solving the problem, helping the patients. So when you started the project, you mentioned it was very hard for you to get data, and also when it comes to disease or symptom, this type of detection, I would imagine the data would be highly imbalanced, right? You probably have a majority of the case doesn't have that disease. So how did you solve that imbalance class problem?
Yeah, so I think data cleaning or data identification and anomalies is one of the basic steps that a lot of people in the data field are either not comfortable doing or they don't want to do or they don't think that it's their job. So we can answer all of that in like later in the session, how this overall field has evolved and how these rules have evolved and all of that. But again, in my case, as a research person and as a student, like I got a data. Whatever I could get, I was like, I'm happy with that, right? Let's start working on it.
Yeah.
That was the spirit at that point. In terms of the data imbalance, so there are a few big challenges that I remember for sure. One of the biggest one was the noise in the data, right? When I say noise in the data, the different machines that are used to do EKGs, there was no standardization of those. So there were actually three different types of formats that we got the data in. And each format came with its own level of noise, which was either making false positives or false negatives, right? So looking at those kind of data sets, we had to figure out like which ones are really the false negatives, false positive. First of all, we need to know that, and we are not doctors, right? So we needed the domain knowledge to understand that. So that's why I was very kind of blessed that we worked with one of the largest hospitals at that time, and I had in my as an advisor one of the person who was like the only kind of the doctor in that area, was very expert in that. So whenever we had those situations where I could see a pattern, I would take the data set to that person with the caveats, and not just one, but like few examples, and ask for his advice. Do you think this is correct, what I'm seeing? And he would just look at that because he has been doing that for a long time. Like, no, this is not correct, or yes, this is correct. So that way, once I know enough patterns, I could like get myself and my team members corrected it ourselves. So it was a lot of manual effort again back in the day. And then the other thing that we did, which was another problem related to data, was other than the noise problem, was the noise and the format problem. So there's two different problems. The third biggest problem with the kind of data was the standardization across those things, because the result on one format does not work the same accuracy, same stuff on the other format, because we had to do a lot of cleaning up to that point where it can be used. So at some point, we actually dropped one of the formats because we did not have enough time if we went that route. So we had to make some decisions that we are going to prioritize these two types of formats, these kind of things. And then, as I said earlier, we started with a bigger problem, and then we kind of started to narrow it down to one of the arrhythmias and one of the ones that we were able to get the accurate results. We started with a bunch of ideas, bunch of kind of whiteboarding, but we had to kind of come to a solution where we can get data at a consistent pace, and then also understand the anomalies, also understand the outliers, and everything else related to that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And right now, when you do model updating, what are some general approach? Do you have any framework to handle anomalies or like outliers to detect or like data drift?
Yeah, so right now we have a standard kind of processing and libraries we use in Python that go through the over time, like the outliers, and like remove them, right? And then in some cases we don't really remove them as well. We keep them in terms of the result set, but don't let that result set impact the rest of it. So we do divide the data into different cohorts. So that was another thing that we understood. Some of the data sets that we get, especially between gender, they're very different. So the way human hearts are, again, it's a particular detail where men versus women, the way they behave is very different in terms of certain situations. Especially when you go to hospital and your EKG has been taken, it's a very interesting thing to look at. It's a bit different. So we had to. So right now, going back to your question, we do have a process, a standard process that goes through that. It has a certain threshold. Beyond certain threshold, if we see outliers, then there is a alert that goes into the system. We park the data set in a separate landing space where somebody goes and manually checks them. And if over time that has a lot of data sets, then we actually go back and see if there's a problem in the pipeline itself. In terms of the model operationalization, I think we've gone through three pivots of it. We have looked at different technologies. These days, you can find out these terms like MLOps, right? A lot of you listening would know about what I'm talking. But maybe if you don't know about, it's about taking your model in from your hypothesis through your dev, your test to actually production. And different technologies, several different technologies. Coming from a software engineering background, very basic understanding of that is like, how do you version your model correctly? Which version has what percentage of outputs that and performance that you're looking for? And over time, if you update that version with a new one, you need to look at the comparison of the results, and in some case, backtrack to a previous version if latest version is not up to mark as well. So having a consistent way, we use a lot of kind of coming from data engineering, since most of my career afterward has been in data engineering. So I did a lot of work in CI/CD pipelines, where you can kind of push a button which does everything for you. You just monitor it and make sure everything went across. We collect a bunch of metadata, data lineage, and then you're done. To you, it's more model itself is packaged, so it's basically a black box. You don't know what it is doing. And there's other security. Again, in the healthcare space, there are a lot of compliance issues that you can't see where the data is coming from, who is doing what. So there's a lot of everyone who touches the data point, you need to measure, you need to have an audit of that. So those are all the things you need to build depending on what is your model, how complex is your model, and what industry you are deploying it. Same is for financial industry and few others, which are highly regulated industries where you can't just like really go and make any change. So I think a lot of my challenges were understanding the compliance, the regulations, understanding the toolkits that were available. As I mentioned, there have been 3 iterations of it so far, and I don't think it's perfect yet, but it does the work, and it is good for the solution that we are looking for.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you worked as a data engineer. So, how does that experience help you in building models and putting models in productions? Because a lot of people, when they think about getting into machine learning, they want to go directly in it. And if you work in the field, you know we deal with data engineering, data cleaning all the time. So, yeah, can you share how has that experience helped you in your later career?
Yeah, I think it's my path has been very non kind of unconventional in that sense, because I did data science first, and then I went the data warehousing, data engineering route, and data architecture route while I was doing this on the side, right? So my career or work wise, I've spent a lot of years in data architecture and data engineering, and recently kind of the product management of data, right? So so when you look at from this side, like when I say this side, I mean the data engineering, data warehousing, maintaining, data architecture. You are taking a kind of central IT role where you are trying to understand the different types of like the data sets that your company or organization has. So they have different challenges, the refresh schedules, the cleaning problems, the data quality problems, all of that. So you look at like a lot of people think data engineering is making data pipelines. That's wrong. It's way more than that, because you need to understand what is the most optimal way of collecting the data, storing the data, and then presenting the data and making it available for your teams. So that's what data engineering is for me. So I've spent most of my career in that space, and I can talk a lot in more detail. Now, if I look from a data science perspective, what you want is an access to data, semi-clean. You don't need super clean data, but you need at least some data which comes at which has some trust in it. We don't want like the most the data as soon as it lands or something like that. So some semi-clean data where you can start your hypothesis testing, you can start building what you're trying to solve the problem for, and you can start your initial version of the model. Now, when you look at the data set and start building your model and it's in a decent shape, now you want to compare it with a production grade data or something which is kind of cleaned up. So you either reach out to your data engineering team, or if you have an analyst in your team, to kind of get you those. In some organizations, if let's say if you are in a startup or somewhere else, you might be the one who's doing all of that, right? So the definition of this role itself is not uniform across the industry, and that's probably a pain point for a lot of folks who are listening to this. So from your perspective, you want to kind of make sure your model is the best model, which is solving the problem. And now when it is done, you need somebody else to take that to production. In some cases, again, I've seen the same folks who build the model also do the MLOps work. So you might be doing that as well. But ideally, there's a separate team who takes that, to whom it does not matter what model it is, what it is, but they know how to deploy this in a production scale. They know how to version it. They know how to kind of build those pipelines for you to version it over time. And then eventually, depending on where you are, let's say if you have a website where it's a recommended model or something else, how do you make your customer come and use that? And over time, there's a feedback loop that goes back to you as a data scientist. So those are kind of the four different kind of principles or like kind of disciplines that I think every data organization should have in one shape or form, right? Now, where it gets messy is when you have different teams, let's say business analyst teams and data analyst team and data scientists sit in a different organization where they're business focused, and then your IT team is like doing the data work. Now you need to work very closely in these cases because you're looking at the same data, right? And you're trying to solve this kind of problems that you want from business perspective. So it's more of a people problem in that case than any other problem, than a data problem. So over time, what I've done is kind of understand from the business team perspective, what are their objectives? What are their kind of business margins? What are they looking for? And how can this set of data can solve that, right? So this is the question you, as any data role, should be asking. Start with the why. Why are you solving this problem? And go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because a lot of times we are so excited in getting into the data, playing with the model, and forget to take a step back and ask the why. Why do you need this? Maybe they are not asking the right questions. As a data scientist, you can propose the right solution, and or maybe sometimes the data will not solve the problem, right? And the data scientist, because you have the data, you have the domain knowledge, so take that ownership. It doesn't matter what your title is. Maybe you are a data engineer, but you can also do some quick analysis to see whether the data is feasible for data scientists to build the model. So I think it's very important point you mentioned, to don't put yourself in a pigeonhole when you work in an organization. And again, I think your very diverse background in different data roles definitely give you a lot of edge in your later career growth. So, and then another very interesting point you mentioned, the problem sometimes is not in the data, but in the people. Can you share more about what are the challenges there? And as a leader, how do you facilitate those collaboration?
Yeah, I think to me, this is a very cliche answer that everything kind of starts with the people and ends with the people. So in between, there is the process and technology and everything else that you have around. But at the end of the day, we are we are social human beings. We are who we are in terms of what we bring to the table as humans, right? So building those relationships with the folks on personal level to understand like what motivates them as a leader, and then how can you be how can you be that facilitator, to me is to kind of as a leader is to empower them to do their job better, right? At the end of the day, that should map to a business objective that I have for my team. But if I don't know the strengths of my folks, if I don't connect with them at that level, and have that empathy to kind of understand their strengths and weaknesses, I would not know what opportunities they're looking for, or what opportunities are best for them for their
Mm-hmm.
growth. So there's this term that we use here in Microsoft a lot, which is growth mindset. So the things that we are looking for, or what we are looking for folks are who are willing to learn, because a lot of people get stuck on the tool set or a certain model or something that they are very passionate about, or they have studied or researched. But I can tell you from my experience without any doubt that every 3 to 5 years there is something else that
Yeah.
comes up, right? So whatever you're learning today is not going to be relevant, let's say in 5 years or 3 years. And I can say that with a lot of authority, because I've seen many waves of this, right? Where different things came and went. Now, what will matter for you is that growth mindset, is that the mindset which is ready to learn, which is ready to adopt, which is ready to kind of take that bet in your own growth, and as well as kind of understanding, going back to the why question, why do I need to build this thing, why do I need to solve
Mm-hmm.
this problem, and then how comes afterwards, because how can vary in teams, how can vary in the organization to organization, and there are several kind of tech stacks that you will learn over the years. And if you have that mindset that can go and learn, you will fit into any organization very well. We also say this a lot, like when I'm interviewing folks, I look at their resumes, I'm looking at that hunger, I'm looking at that humbleness that comes with it, where you are ready to take on challenges, you're humble about it, but you're hungry to learn, right? So those are the kind of traits where I bet on folks on their potential rather than what is in their resume right now, saying that these are the five things I know, and I'm really well at
Mm-hmm.
that. Because in 5 years or 2 years or 3 years, you never know. They might not be relevant, or they might not be something you will be
Yeah.
working on. But if you have that mindset, your path is going to be really
Yeah,
successful.
thanks for sharing that. And so, from the beginning of your career, I remember you mentioned using like MATLAB. I know the tools are not the most important thing, but yeah, I'm just curious, based on your observation, your experience, what are some tools that you feel people are using less and less, kind of are um, expiring? And what are some tools data scientists or machine learning engineers start to adopt more?
Yeah, I think over the years I've seen a lot of shift towards Python. So Python has been something that's there, and I think it's not going away
Mm-hmm.
anytime soon, right? It's going to stay. So if you have to bet on one thing, I would say bet on that from a data science
Yeah.
perspective. Even if, let's say, you switch towards data engineering, or you are focused on data engineering, Python is a lot of Python and Scala would be the second one, but Python still has a lot of potential. So start with that. I think in terms of your basics, that's where that has been the most useful one. In terms of like frameworks, I that's where I say that the frameworks change over time. So I know the people debate on R versus Python, people debate on a particular scikit-learn or something like things like that. Those are you can search today, that you will find those top five things, right? Those are very basic things that I'll give you an example from data engineering in terms of ETL, like extract, transform, and load. There have been several tools over the years that I've used, right? Depending on the organization. The ones that stayed the most are like the recent ones are Spark based. So they are the latest one, and they've been there for the last, I would say, 6 to 8 years. Very very kind of solid performance on that. But before that, there have been so many. Like you can use no code solutions. You can use code solutions. There's always a debate between how much no code versus code I should be as a person,
Mm-hmm.
as a role, or something like that. There's a similar debate in data science, like where does this future, like would it be no code? Do I need to know coding for this and that? A lot of people get hung up on that. To me, I think it's important to get your basics right. It's important to understand the principles. It's important to understand like the why of the problems, and then have a few technical skills, Python and maybe a few other kind of things, to just understand how notebook works, or how you can how pip install something, things like that. And then do certain projects with it. That's a good starting point for you. And once you are committed to do or solve a certain problem that you're passionate about, there is no end to it today. Because if anything, pandemic has told us in the last 2 years, you have access to everyone or everything at kind of the fingertips, right? You can reach out to folks on LinkedIn. You can follow them, folks like you who are kind of driving a lot of this movements around data science and other places. You can subscribe to newsletters. You can read on Medium. There are so many places and things that you can learn, all of the tool sets and things. But having that courage to take that first step, having a consistent plan and a goal for yourself, a measurable goal, not just that I want to become a data scientist. Just make it more measurable, that I want to become a data scientist in 3 months by doing XYZ, and this is my end goal, that I will be publishing this on my GitHub. Once you do that, then you're really successful. Don't just kind of have a very generic goal.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And previously, you mentioned there's a debate about like no code, low code, or should you be, a code expert? So, personally, do you have any favorite like no code or low code tools that you use?
So I currently don't use any of kind of the no code low code solutions. We use a lot of our kind of work is in Azure DevOps. But since I moved to the product side, my time mostly spent on business objectives, strategy making, things like that. A lot of like OKR and all of that. So I don't really use a lot of kind of tooling anymore. But if I had to choose between some of like the model development one and other things, I think AWS has some great ones. Azure has a similar environments where you can do drag and drop stuff. Um, Again, I think when I look in the future, there is going to be still a mix. So if you come from a coding background, I don't think that your skills are going to go away anytime any soon. So don't get worried about like, oh, this solution is coming or this is booming, anything like that. Again, if you know the problem well, either the domain knowledge or you're really well in solving complex problems using the data that you have given access to, or having that ability to understand and collect the right data and solve that problem, you will be successful. You'll still find opportunities that are going to work. uh, Tools come and go, solutions come and go. Focus on the fundamentals and like keep learning, keep building on those skill sets, and have kind of mentors and folks who you can ask questions, technical as well as non-technical, where you can learn from experiences which are different than yours as well, which is what a lot of folks forget. Because they focus that if I do this work and this is my work and I'll keep doing this, I'll be the best kind of data scientist or best data engineer or best that. I think in order to, you don't know what you don't know, so it's something that you should always think about, in terms of having thought leaders, having kind of folks that can encourage you in your journey and provide you different guidance and other things as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So going back to ML ops, you mentioned a lot of times in the organization there are different teams specializing research in the models and putting model in production. And comparing that, like a big team with different people with different data roles versus one person, for example, when you just started your research project and then you're the one wearing multiple hats, you're the data engineer, you're the data scientist, the researcher, and you also put model in production. So what is the kind of the differences in one person doing a lot of things versus working in a certain role in the team?
Yeah. So I think in the industry, we say this as a couple of ways, right? So there are roles which are generalist roles and there are roles which are specialist roles.
Yeah.
And whenever you're interviewing in a particular place, always, always, always try to understand what does a day look like for that person? What does a project delivery looks like? Not just a day, but basically understand how do you deliver something in that team and what does impact look like in that team. When you ask those questions, you understand what is expected out of you to be successful in that role. and that gives you a lot of answers to what a typical work week would look like if you join that team, right? So a lot of people make that mistakes that they look at the job description, they apply the role, and if they join and then they find out, oh, this is just one portion of that what they asked me in the interview. I'm supposed to clean the data also. I'm supposed to do the reporting side as well. I'm supposed to do all of these other things as well. So always kind of ask those right questions while you're interviewing. Now, going back to your question in terms of what it looks like in the industry, so these are two separate types of folks. When I look at folks, there are generalists who can understand the concepts of different areas, more of an architect type role where they can take different things and they can do a lot of general stuff, but they're not so deep into one area, or they might be deep in a couple of areas and that's it. Where they rely on other folks to build the whole end-to-end picture of this, right? Now, people who are specialists, if you go in mature organizations, people who like mid-sized to large-sized organizations, especially mature teams, you'll find those specialist role because they would have some level of say some level of definition of what a role is, and they will have boundaries like your role starts from here to here, and that could be taking the data from a sandbox or some environment to build like training some model and then making sure your model does the best thing what it's supposed to do, and then leave it there, and then somebody else comes and does the deployment. A lot of startups type companies or teams who are in that innovation mode, you might be wearing multiple hats because again, hiring is hard. It's very difficult to find specialists and then the right type of specialists and build that integration between them. So you might be asked to go beyond your job description to do those things, which is not always bad as well. I'm not advocating that this is good or bad. I have done that myself as I worked in a startup and other places where I actually, the day I joined, had to understand the whole thing and learn by myself how to take X to Y. So you might be okay doing that as well. But in that cases, I will always say like suggest if you don't know a particular area, ask questions, find folks who know that area, learn from those experience, and over time add to your kind of career goals, whatever they are. And if I look back in terms of my career, I have actually done both, right? I've done specialist roles and I've done kind of generalist roles. Especially if, as an architect, you're more of a generalist where you understand different problems, you understand different pain points, and try to put that picture together or puzzle together. So you will see over time that can change. But at the end of the day, when you look at your skill set, the things that motivate you, think about those. Think about the things that make you happy. If that's the current role that is doing, then keep doing that. If not, then there's always something that you can find which will provide you that satisfaction, motivation that you need from your role.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's some great career advice. So when you started to grow from a data engineer to software development manager, what was the shift? What does the shift look like? Because you don't just think about how do you complete a project. You need to think about the roadmap of the team and developing people. I think previously we chatted a little bit about how do you scale a solution. So how do you learn how build creating more impact, not just for yourself but for a team?
Yeah, a lot. This is a very common question that people ask when they're thinking about either this as an option to switch or just understanding what it takes to be a manager. And then one of the things that I always mention, this is not either or. So I know companies, I know places where you can be an individual contributor or an IC for most of your career, and you can get to the highest level just by being an IC, and that if that is something you enjoy, then that is the path for you. You don't have to be a manager just because you think that is something that's leadership. There's this advice that I got some years ago that leadership is not a title, is an action. So if you think that you are doing that in your current role as a individual contributor, then continue to do that, and that's the right path for you. So your question about management, right? I ended up as an accident into this role. I was already a tech lead of the team, and this opportunity came up where my manager was leaving. So my skip level actually offered this option to me that do you want to take this option? And I wasn't thinking about that at that point in my career. So I actually evaluated and I looked at like the skills that are needed to be a good manager. I talked to a few folks, my mentors and other people, and asked those questions in what it takes to be a good manager. And the answers I got, I felt like I fit in somehow, that I think that would be the right path for me. So I made that decision based on the skill set that I currently had, things, areas of improvement that I thought I should be. And then I made a bet that, yeah, let's try it out. So what those things are, I'll just mention a few, right? So when you become a manager, it's not about your individual contributions at all anymore. It's about your team's contribution. It is about being that enabler to the team to empower them to make the right decisions. There are decisions that you have to make. There are tough decisions you have to make as part of that journey as well. And then there are things like a lot of things that you don't worry about because let's say the tasks are assigned to you automatically. Now, as a manager or as a leader in the org, it might come to you to define the prioritization between the 50 things that the team wants you to do or the organization wants to do. So which ones you prioritize over the other? What is the customer intake looks like? What does the other things look like? So there's a lot of that hat that you have to wear. Then I spend a lot of time in people growth, like career growth. So promotions, like career, understanding folks where they are, spending a lot of time in one-on-ones. Because as a good manager or to be a great manager, I think if you, again, going back to the thing we started in the start of the call, if you don't understand the people, their strengths, their weaknesses, their aspirations, you will not be able to help them grow in their careers. And eventually, people say that people don't leave organizations; they actually leave managers. So, as a manager, I think it's very important to do all of that. It's a lot of responsibility. At the same time, it is a lot of kind of great learning and skills that you won't get otherwise if you are in the other way. And then it's fine if you are fine with that, with the skill set that you are kind of going at in the route of IC as well, as I mentioned. But to me, I think it was very exciting to take on this journey and learn from this experience and grow from there. So we do say that we have this culture of model, coach, and care. Those are the three most important things as a manager to do, because you have to model the behavior you want the team to have. You have to coach them, guide them, and then the most important thing is you have to care. If you don't care about your team members, it's not going to work out.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Especially, I like when you said you don't have to have the manager title to be a leader. Yeah. So, and going back to the technical side, so what is like the most challenging engineering or data science problem you solved?
So there are a lot of interesting problems I've solved in terms of the technical problems. So one of the technical problems that comes to my mind was a distributed problem where our data was pretty distributed and pretty diverse. It was coming in at a speed which was petabytes of scale. We had Spark in front of it, which was trying to solve that the data kind of discovery. And there was some interesting solutions on top of it. One of them was a machine learning model which was doing an inference on that data. Now, the data started as a few petabytes, which is still very huge. The systems we had was very, very heavily kind of loaded. We tested it, we performance tested all of that. But what happened is one of the weekends, I think we went in, we not went in, actually, we got an email saying that that things are failing. So like any engineer, you get those emails, you like look at it like what just happened, because I tested it, I did everything right. What just happened? And we realized that there was one of the data sets was having a lot of problem in the data delivery. So they were not providing the data, and then all of a sudden after the problem was solved, we got 3 days or 4 days worth of data all at once.
Yeah.
So the volume was 4x for that. Now, since the solution was developed in a way that it could take up to 3x of the volume, and we tested and all of that, we did not think of one scenario, which is now it seems to be a very trivial one. That what if one of the data source has retry logic, and what happens in that retry logic if that's so it's a very, very kind of simple problem right now if you look at, but when you're looking at volumes of data and different types of sources, Now you can imagine in this case there were 250 different data sources. So I'm talking about one of
Mm.
them. So you can really get lost in the complexity of some of these problems. So we did solve that problem, but the way we solved it, I think it was one of the best solution in a way that it solved the problem for like many years to come. Where now we added a threshold on top of every source, where we had a buffer. Like even if the source can provide 4x or 5x, we will still kind of know and have the right thresholds and do it from that point. So it was an interesting. And then at the hardware level also, we did some interesting innovation where we had solutions in Spark at the input level itself instead of like doing it later in the part. So those were some interesting things we did. We did publish some papers on that later as well, which was very interesting. That was very well adopted by the industry as a standard. And I think very interesting overall when you look back after years. But at that point, I think the biggest challenge from that perspective is one, challenge those assumptions. That's the biggest thing. When you assume something, that this is what we've always got, this is how it's always going to be, assume those assumptions can go wrong very fast. So always challenge those, no matter what level title you have in the company. If you don't do that, at the end of the day, you have to work extra hours to solve that problem if that happens, right? So
Yeah.
that was my one learning out of that. The second learning I had out of that was, take a step back, because when you are solving a part of the problem, you don't look at the big picture. So
Yeah.
take a step back, even if, again, no matter what career title things you have, take a look back at the whole architecture, understand the things, again, asking that why question, why I'm solving this piece of this big puzzle, how it solves a bigger problem. And when you take a look back with fresh eyes, you always find issues that you might have not seen before when you were just focused on one part of it. So those were two of my biggest learning, and I think they stayed with me for a while, with the pain that we had to go through of that experience. But all is well that kind of ends
Yeah.
well.
Thanks for sharing the learning with us. Can you tell us more about the paper you published based off this project? And you said a lot of other folks, peers, adopted this as the industry standards. Can you tell us specifically what they have adopted?
Yeah, so it's basically a paper on distributed. Maybe I can send it
Mhm.
afterwards, the link to you. It's a paper on distributed Spark programming. So there are a bunch of my colleagues who are the author of that, and the this is, I think, 5 years or 6 years ago, to be accurate. And then the problem at that point was Spark adopters itself, the connectors were not advanced enough as also, right? So we had to actually write additional adopters to to figure out that anomaly at the
Mm.
source level. So that portion was taken, like that paper was adopted by now kind of the Spark standards. So if you go right now in Spark, you will find that as
Mm.
a standard library. That part was done open source. So Spark, Apache Spark is open source, so people do contribute to that. But the work or the idea started there, and then they were, I think it was not just us who faced the problem. There were other folks who had similar problems, who had really interesting data points of how Spark can solve that
Mm.
problem. We also looked at other solutions at that point. Spark was one, but we also looked at other JavaScript, Java-based solutions, and some others that I'm totally forgetting right now. But there were at least 3 or 4 other solutions that we looked at. But we went with one route and published that, and that went into. But it's a distributed processing Spark connector problem, and I can send you the link
Yeah.
afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you. So when you try to launch a data science product, for example, the data scientist might have developed a model, but it's just like a proof of concept, and then you need to do some test. Probably, this is my assumption. I want to see basically what is your approach to take a POC validated model and then put into production, eventually scale the solution. What is the
Yeah.
cycle like? Yeah.
So so I think the cycle varies by the team and org size and the skill set that you have
Mm.
in the team, right? I've seen different versions over the years. So I've seen small teams where you have 2 or 3 data scientists who take a couple of problems, and they kind of they are more of a generalist, where they kind of take the data sets already existing. They take existing models also in some cases, and
Yeah.
then solve that problem and then publish the result. So once result is acceptable for the problem that they're solving, then they package the model in some way, and then that gets deployed as part of the product, either the website or wherever you're using internally. Also, in some cases, anomaly detection, all of that can be used. Now, the things that I've seen at scale, where you are solving a problem scale, especially like a recent one that I've seen in the IoT space, where you want, so I will not take the name of the customer, but they actually have they're a manufacturing plant where they manufacture a lot of products, a lot of I would say machinery at a large scale, and their devices have this image that they take of the, and they identify if it's damaged or not. So now and previously it was a manual process. Some years ago they advanced it. They had an AI kind of a model built which takes the image, which is image detection solution, and it is pretty accurate. But now the problem with that particular thing is that over time, the scale has increased, and with the scale, defects have increased. So the model cannot keep up with that. The IoT edge solution of the ML model does not work for that scale, and now they're losing like millions of dollars if they continue on this path. So that's an interesting problem in that sense to solve for scale. The conventional way of doing is just go and update that existing model with the latest of the tech stack and all of that, and go that route. What we did, or what I did explicitly in this case, is take a step back to understand what is the problem they're solving. Are there other alternate solutions which might be cheaper than the current model to solve that? Because since they deployed, the industry has gone like many like few years into it, and there are much better solutions that are available that can take a better picture and can be more accurate than the existing model. So just taking the existing model and then just retraining would not solve that problem. It would solve the problem with, let's say, save them a few $1,000,000, but not at scale, because you're thinking about that right now solution. So what we did is, instead of doing that, we actually provided a complete new solution with taking the kind of existing inference of the existing model, but made it like v.2 or whatever the new version, and then deployed it on. We also looked at the positioning of it. Like we also looked at like how over time that positioning is not accurate because of the lighting in the room and lighting in the overall area. So we provided that additional context, and then we saw right away that the solution is much better. It's at least 2x better than the existing one, and it's doing at large scale. And the scale problem is also interesting because you measure those things at like the Mbps per seconds, right?
Yeah.
Over time, your cameras have also advanced a lot. So we actually looked at that also at the latest kind of version, but at the same time keeping the cost low, because they can't afford to have like a DSLR over there, right? Because it's not just one input point. They look at multiple input points. So again, long story short, looking at the problem on hand, just taking the low hanging fruit is not always the right solution sometimes. The reverse is also true. But always, if you have seen such problems at scale, take a step back to see why you were doing that, how you were doing that, what were your assumptions when you went with that solution, and go to the whiteboard. Have an ideation session with your team, as a leader especially, and then get all the ideas from the team in that sense to come together at a solution, and describe pros and cons. I say this a lot. A lot of people who know me personally say that there's no right and wrong architecture. There's no right and wrong solution. Every architecture and solution has pros and cons. And that's the discussion you should be talking about. It's not about my solution is better than yours. It's about the pros and cons of your solution and how that is better for this problem than anything else.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when I started my career, I feel very insecure whenever I develop a model. I just feels like it's like the mindset we have in school. There's always a standard solution. I was so scared. What if this wasn't the right one, right? And sometimes you just feel the more senior data center engineer, their solution is the standard. But like you mentioned, it's about whether it solves the problem, meets the business requirement. Also, you talk about cost a lot. I think that's also what we need to take into our equation. So in terms of scaling solutions, what are some common mistakes you see people make?
Yeah, I think software scaling wise, also again, the industry has gone a long way. So you have Kubernetes based solutions right now, cloud
Mm-hmm.
based solutions right now that can scale your deployments very, very fast. Back in the day, you had to wait for physical hardware to show up in your data center, maybe sometimes wait for months for it to actually scale to the level you want. But today, with the advancements of cloud technologies and other solutions like Kubernetes, you can do that with the click of your button, and you can do 5x, 10x, 50x, even 100x if you want to. At the end of the day, it comes back to like what is the cost associated, because you can definitely scale your problem, but can you afford that scale? Because it comes with the cost of compute, it comes with the cost of additional overhead, it comes with the cost of additional maintenance, it also comes with the cost of an additional point of failure. So all of those things people don't think about. They think about, oh, I scaled this model up to, let's say, 5x, 100, 10x, and it's so much more accurate. Now, what they didn't think about is now with the 10x, you've added 10 more points of failure. And if one of them fails, you're going to have load on the other ones, and then others will start failing
Mm-hmm.
as well. Or other things can happen, again, if you have not thoroughly tested those things or those
Yeah.
scenarios. So, scaling is a very interesting thing. I can talk about it for hours because this is what I do right now
Mm-hmm.
in Azure. We talk about scales, we talk about availability, SLAs, the failure times, the recovery times. A lot of my conversations with customers are about
Mm-hmm.
those things, but the pushback is always the cost, right? So you have to think about the cost because at the end of the day, you have a limited budget to solve that problem. How effectively you do that with the models that you have, how effectively you do that with the pipelines that you currently
Mm-hmm.
have, considering the future scale in that. Those are interesting challenges, and there are different architectures, again, pros and cons with going one way or the other. But if somebody comes to me and say that my solution is the perfect one and I don't need resiliency and I don't need anything like that, I really, really challenge that, because you only know that once
Yeah.
your system is down. And once you're down, then you'll know what is the impact, what is the dollar impact, what is the impact on your pipelines, what is the impact on your
Mm-hmm.
processing, on your customer case. So think about those. When I look at any functional spec or design spec, that's one question area that I always ask a lot of questions about. Like, have you thought about this scenario? Have you thought about that scenario? Have you thought about this failing with another scenario or something like that? So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And then you also mentioned when you scale up a solution, you are sometimes adding multiple potential points of failure. So how do you mitigate that? Do you set up more alarms? Do you set up more availability options so to ultimately fall back to solutions? Like how do you mitigate the multiple failure points of failure in when you scale a solution?
Yeah, so for scaling a solution, it comes back to the criticality of that problem. So, if how
Mhm.
business critical is it, right? So, if it's
Yeah.
something a recommender which can be inaccurate and people are still fine with your customer, so maybe it's okay. But if it's something that is used in, let's say, healthcare, where some life decisions are made, or some other places where it's more business critical, you need to think about resiliency at a very, very kind of higher scale than anything else. So those are kind of basics, and I think most of the engineers understand that. Now, coming back to your question about like when you add those points of failures, there are several ways to solve that problem. One of the you pointed towards that is like one of that is that retry logic, like understanding of that logic of failure and having the right thresholds for the right alarms to go, and then do a step forward, do a step ahead of that, not just the alarms but also some self healing type solutions where you can retry, where you can look at the common errors and try to solve that problem. Some of the sophisticated solutions I've seen do have those things in their pipelines and in their alarms and monitoring solutions. Now, when you need a human intervention, which means that somebody will be on call or something like that, that will go into
Mhm.
that. When you solve that incident at that point, come back to it afterwards to do a deep dive into it to understand why this happened. What is the pattern that is happening? If it's happening again and again, figure out that pattern, solve that earlier on, because the end result is when you see it, the problem, but it's usually arising because of some other thing in your
Mhm.
system beforehand. It could be the data set, it could be the model itself, it could be the way you deployed it, it could be the tech stack, it could be the cloud provider, it could be any of those things. So doing that deep dive helps you solve this problem for the next time as well. And the last thing in terms of scale I would mention is challenge challenge that in a sense, like why do you really need that scale? A lot of people want to move to a particular scale because this is the cool thing to do, or this is the thing that will solve all of their problems. When I say challenge those is to understand what business purpose it is doing. I'll take a very simple example of databases. When you have a read replica of a database, you're solving a business problem where you are removing the read write from read write to a person who is doing the query. So that's a very basic concurrency problem you're solving. And having that read layer is now providing your end user with a much better experience, and then and you're basically dividing your workload into two different kind of patterns, your read and write, and then just the read for your business users and users. So a lot of people think about this as a scale problem. To me, it's a business problem you're solving.
Right.
So taking that different hat, different lens, sometimes helps you solving these scale problems, and why you need to do this, and how is the best way to solve this problem. Sometimes scale is not the only solution you can solve it. And then again, always think about the cost. So
yeah, that's a great point. It's not like the bigger the better it is, right? Like what is the problem you're trying to solve? Maybe you need like 100% accuracy for some critical case, for example, I don't know, healthcare related. You don't really want to scale that, and maybe people want to put a little bit more cost on that. I think that's a great mindset we need to remind ourselves of. And also now I think it's natural to talk about your transition to a product leader, because I can see that whenever you think about engineering problem, you naturally have that mindset to think about the business impact of the product cycle. So can you tell us what is your day-to-day as a product leader in the kind of data, machine learning, cloud field?
yeah, so currently I lead a team of for developer focused areas in Azure Data Services. So if you look at our Azure Data Services, especially the database platform, so Azure SQL DB, and I work closely with other teams like Cosmos DB and Postgres and MySQL and all of the core databases that are there. So in my current role, I wear like the developer's hat, but from a product perspective. So if I'm a developer and I'm using this set of databases, specifically Azure SQL DB. What are the things that make my life easy? What are the things that make my life difficult? And how can I solve that problem from product perspective to make those experiences much better? So I do look at a lot of telemetry that comes from our different systems. I look at like what developers use our databases for. I look at all of that. So the reason, one of the biggest reason I switched that, which is very, like a lot of people do ask me why I did that, is one of the things is there's a lot of like engineering that I've done a lot of my years. So I've learned the basics. I've kind of experienced it. I've done it at a scale. So I've grown into that role. But one thing that was missing in my skill set was that exercise of the business skills. So there were a few routes I could take. One route was I could take an MBA, learn from that side, and do that. And I actually looked at that as an option. The second route was, since my core is in data, why don't I actually look at like the data products and like really work on the strategy team and like work on the product side. So this opportunity came in, and I really enjoyed kind of going through the interview and all of that, and went for it. And I am really enjoying and loving it, because it's a very different angle of of that problem, where you as a consumer come and use a particular product, but building that product, those feature set, and then coming up with a strategy of what's coming next, where the industry is going, what trends are there, how can we better support developers, how can we better do that. So it's a lot of different type of challenges that I deal with my current role. And coming from that background of being a developer myself, I think helps me in this transition, and has helped me so far, and hoping it will stay the same.
Yeah, that's great, because I think based on my experiences when working with the product manager, I think sometimes there are some challenges for them to know exactly the tools or the timelines we need when it comes to developing a data science model. So I think your developers will very enjoy working with you. So when it comes to being a product leader, now looking back in your previous career journey, and also to our data scientists, what are some useful mindset you think we can learn from a product manager's perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest one is what I kept saying. I think most of this call is understanding the why and the business
Yeah.
reason, because at the end of the day, whatever you're building, it's solving a business problem, and that business problem should be aligned to your work one way or the other.
Mhm.
That's the only way you can be impactful in your job and like make sure that you're doing the right things, the right focus for your organization. From a product management perspective, the one thing I wasn't so good at early in my career was prioritization, right? I would just take anything that's given to me in that priority and then just go to solve that. And maybe that's okay for a while early in your career. But as you advance into senior levels and principals and staff and whatnot, I think it's important to kind of ruthless, like very aggressively do the prioritization. So I use this method, which is a very famous one, which is the 4Ds, right? So there's the do, delete, delegate, and defer. Anything that comes to you, you should think about like, is it something you should do? Is it something you should delegate? Is it something you should delete, or you should do it late at a later time or defer to a separate time? So a lot of that is something that as a product manager you do a lot, because you have so many features that your customers want or you want the company to do or the product to do, but you have to be very very kind of good about prioritizing between those, making a good customer story about it, why you need to do
Mhm.
that, and then convincing your engineering counterparts and other counterparts to actually go and do that. That is one thing, as an engineer, if you can start doing, I think that would help solve a lot of like the why questions as well for you,
Mhm.
because you will know why this is more important than the other one and why you should be doing working more on this or versus something else.
Mhm.
So I would share those two, and then one last thing is understand the objectives. Like, so in a lot of companies we use this model called OKR, objective key results, where you have a particular objective, like what your business objectives are. We A lot of people focus on their deliverable, which is the result. But what we don't like kind of think about is how this result maps to that overall key result of your company and then organization, and then it goes on to your objectives. A lot of time is spent as a product manager on those things, so you're driving the strategy and you're not just thinking about next 6 months, you're thinking about next 1 year in some way or shape or form.
Mhm.
You're thinking about a few years into future also in some cases, where you have to now guide the rest of the teams to do that. From engineering perspective, again, asking the why questions, prioritizing, um, having a customer empathy would also help, because if you a lot of engineers, and I've been guilty of that myself, where you think your solution is the best solution because it solves the best problem or whatever the
Mhm.
problem is. um, but if even if it's the best solution, if it does not solves a customer problem, it's not good enough. So
Mhm.
having that customer empathy is very important, and I think that's where the current role helps in a way to empathize with the customers a lot, and then share that story with engineering counterparts and others.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And can you tell us a little bit about what is a product development cycle, and how can data scientists kind of also see their data science project modeling as a product, and then apply the same, planning or mindset in terms of working on their data science project?
Yeah, so I think different products have a different type of life cycle as well,
Mhm.
depending on like what maturity of the product you have currently. And if it's a brand new or innovative products, then maybe there's no playbook that you start with, right? A lot of great products start to me with ideation, so there's a lot of ideation that you do on different things. Either it could be a customer problem you're solving, or overall, let's say you don't know what product you're building or you're a startup, you start with a lot of ideation around this is what I want to do. So there's like a lot of people use this term as design thinking, where you have personas, understanding different users, their perspectives, and gathering a bunch of data about it. So having data driven decisions actually help a lot. So usually we start with a lot of that whenever we are looking at a particular idea. So we come up with kind of ideation sessions, we do design thinking, we think about personas, we think about how we take this problem and how are the different approaches to go and solve that in terms of the product design perspective. Now when you have a few list of kind of ideas corrected and then some personas associated, the why questions answered, now you can shortlist a few top ones from different voting mechanism or just like doing whiteboarding and other places. You can go on into the next phase, which is the design phase, where we actually kind of write spec, which talks about all the requirements, all of the must-haves, good to have kind of requirements, and then provide again data to see like why we are doing this. So this very important to back that with data, with the customer insights, things like that. If you're building a brand new product, doing a market research would be really, really important, right? In this case, also market research or any marketing response or any customer feedback is very, very, very key, because you don't want to build this product in silo. That's where it's going to fail. If you don't have any feedback, if you don't know what the signals are, and the first time your customer sees this is the only time you get the feedback, it's going to fail. There is no doubt in my mind about that. So from that point onwards, you basically start the process. You start getting the approvals and all of that, whatever is needed in your organization, and start like really building the prototypes, right? You work with engineering teams, or in some cases, your design teams to kind of come together and build the prototypes. So in those prototype phases, there are again back and forth different ways you can do that. There is this terminology used, which is MVP, which is a minimal viable product. So you want something in front of your customers as soon as possible to start giving you feedback. So a lot of companies actually go that route. So that's where I think when you're starting that, it's good to have some prototype, especially in a data science world, taking something in front of with a very basic inputs and outputs, part of that as well. If you can build something quickly with the existing data, that could be a good point to get some initial feedback just to see. And that subset you have to choose very wisely, because you don't want to dissatisfy your customers. At the same time, you don't want it to be so widespread that that people are like, what is this, right? So the beta testers, kind of like the initial folks, very important point is having a diverse input is very important in the initial, because if your subset is always the folks you've always tested with, your product is not going to be diverse or inclusive when it comes out. So those are some steps, and then you go back, then it's basically iteration. You run on it, take certain features, prioritize, go back, re-engineer. You might have to go back to whiteboard in some cases, and then iterate, bring it in front, get the feedback, iterate, go to the next phase, and then it's like, yeah, eventually when you are unstable, you release a private preview, then you do a public review, and eventually it's available to everyone as well. So that's the typical life cycle. Again, every company does in different ways. PMs also have different preferences of doing things, and depending on the product itself, it will vary as well. So how mature your product is, it could be different. The way when you join the team, it could be different as well from that perspective.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I think some key points I learned is don't just build your model on your own and then feel like you want to deliver a perfect model. Show some intermediate result faster to get feedback from. Either set up a testing pipeline to test using real customers' data, or give ask your manager or your peers to provide feedback. That's how you iterate the solution. Also, in the beginning of the project, and going back to the point you mentioned, asking why, and then maybe talk to real customers. Again, either the customers are your stakeholders or someone who uses the product. Ask them how they are going to use it. That's going to be very important when you think about, am I going to find a solution that has like high latency or low latency, or I don't care about latency, the accuracy is the most important thing. So I think there are a lot of things we can learn from the product manager's perspective. So I know you mentor a lot of people. Do you have mentors yourself?
Yeah, I have a lot of mentors. I have a lot of folks over the time as my allies. And then there's a third category, which is like sponsors. So they're not like official title that people have, but I do mention that to everyone that you should have all three types of folks in your career. It's okay if you don't know all of them, like who's your sponsor in your organization, but you should always think that these are three different types of folks that you need in your career growth, and understand, like learn, always connect with them over time. And I do have several, and I have some of my oldest colleagues as my kind of allies and mentors still now, and over time also I kind of look at that. I think one of the famous writer, actually, she mentions this as board of directors. These are the folks who you connect to when you need ideas, when you need to bounce back ideas, when you need guidance, when you need, it could be technical, it could be non-technical, it could be career advice, it could be between switches. So you need all of that. And one type of folks that I definitely have is the folks who are not like me, who don't think like me, who are very different in personality wise and other things, because they give me perspective that I don't get otherwise from a lot of folks that are like me or come from a similar background or have like similar thinking. So think about those folks also.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about what specifically is the ally or sponsor different from mentor?
Yeah, so mentor or the coach is somebody who you go to when you need advice. So let's say if I have a problem, XYZ problem, could be technical, non-technical, whatever that is, I go and ask them, and they are going to tell me, oh, this is the solution, this is how I did it in the past. That advice is very tailored to you because it's not a generic advice. They tell you from their experience, and then you take it based on that. Now, mentors over time can change into other relationships as well, and it's organic. You don't need to have a formal mentor title with somebody who you trust, and you can share questions like that, and they can advise you. If they don't know the answer, they will direct you to somebody who might know the answer. The other two roles are allies and sponsors. So allies to me are the folks who are usually either in your org or in their bigger org, kind of indirectly working with you. Sometimes they could be your stakeholders, where they can provide you the right support when you need it. So let's say if I want to push back on a particular requirement, I can have a peer that can be my ally, and that can say plus one to what just Muazma said. Or I'm in a meeting where I'm feeling very intimidated by what's happening, that ally can say, Muazma, what are your thoughts on this? So those are some folks that I believe are really kind of your allies, and they are the ones who kind of uplift you. They're there for you, and sometimes they can advise you also. But that's that category. Now, sponsors is a different category where they are the ones where they have the access to places where you don't have direct access. So where decisions are made, where things about career growth, about promotions, about other things are being made. Those are the folks, when you're not in the room, can say, yes, I know Mosma, and I know her, or I work with her in XYZ, and she is great at this, or she can do this. When an opportunity comes for a new project, for example, they can advocate on my behalf, and they can say, yes, I've worked with her, she can do this, or this would be a great opportunity for her to take on. So these are kind of the three distinct roles. Sometimes a mentor can also be a sponsor as well over time. You don't know. But I do think that these are separate roles. And while mentoring could be a more kind of formal role in some cases, some companies have mentoring rings and other ways that you can connect. But sponsorship and allies are over time with the folks that you've worked or in your org. They're very much focused on your career growth, and they are the ones who kind of help you in that journey, and possibly can make a lot of difference in your career next steps.
Thanks for sharing that. And what is the best career advice you got from people?
Yeah, so my favorite advice is from my mentor. I think I shared it sometime in this year or last year. I think it's mentorship day or something, which is about be courageous. So she talked about this in one of my meetings, where she talked about a lot of people talk about being fearless, and the advice is like we all are afraid of something. So it's not about being fearless; it's about being courageous. So when you actually have that fear, when you overcome that fear and take that first step, it's the courage that it takes you. So that to me kind of stuck with me for a while. When every time when I am not sure about that step, when I'm not sure if I should speak up or not speak up, or if I should do this or not, or if I should take this opportunity or not, I always think about that courage. And I think I recently heard this other thing where fear stands for false evidence of things appearing real.
Mm,
So to me, that stuck with me, where fear stands for this. I think just overcoming that, it's very very important, especially for people who don't look like a lot of people in the room, right? Like being the only woman in the room, or being the only let's say first generation immigrant, or some other backgrounds that you bring to the table that are unique about you. If you come from one of those minority groups or anything like that, it's really really
mm.
hard. So be
Yeah,
courageous.
thanks for sharing that. And I really like that kind of just embrace the fear and then be courageous. And I wonder if you could share some mistakes you made in your career and what did you learn from those?
Yeah, I think some of the mistakes I've made is one, thinking that my work will speak for
Mm,
itself. This is the thing that a lot of people think, that my work is enough. I put head down, do that. Your work is definitely the most important thing in terms of what you do, but there's a lot more to your work than just delivering the work. So at the end of the day, it is about not just like what how many PRs I made, not how many kind of code lines I checked in, or how many. It's about a well-rounded set of things. It's about how you communicate your problem, how you communicate your solution, how do you communicate with your stakeholders, how do you do a lot of these other things, which is not just your piece of code or like lines of code or things like that. So think one of the mistakes I did for a long time is thinking that is good enough, and that should
mm,
be fine. So you should definitely invest on a lot of these other skills, which includes communication skills,
yeah,
sometimes negotiation skills, working with different teams, understanding their demands, having the customer understandings, all of that. So as an engineer, that's a thing a lot of people do. So definitely that was one of my mistakes. The other mistake, I would say, is not being intentional about my network in a sense. Is not being intentional. When I say not being intentional, is like organically you all have network. Everybody has a network because you work with certain folks. They are part of your
mm,
network. But over time, you realize as you become senior in your career and other stages, you need a lot of those folks that I mentioned in on your side when you are in those situations. And if you're not intentional about it, over time you will not know who those
yeah,
folks are. So making sure that you kind of have that board of directors with you over time, and then making sure that you keep on adding on to it rather than removing a lot of folks, to make sure you have bunch of different type of experiences folks, different types of folks. That is another kind of mistake, in a sense that I did not do it a lot of my early career. So those would be kind of my two mistakes that I would really wish that folks understand and do it early on in their
yeah.
career.
Thanks for sharing that. And throughout your career, I think you probably also experience a lot of changes in the trend in data science and engineering, especially AI. So how did you keep up with the new the tools, the models? How do you keep learning?
Yeah, I think mentioned that earlier on, that like if you're not learning, you're stale basically, right? So every single day when you go to work, you're always learning something new in some shape or form. So having that open ears, open eyes, keeping an eye out to what's coming in, what trends are there, that's very important. So how I have done that, so I always look at my work in like 70-20-10 kind of percentage. So I look at like 70% of my time is my job, my top things that I have to deliver, my impact, all of that, like all of the things that are most important for my current title, my current deliverables. Now 20% are the skills, that time that I spent on these skills that I need to keep myself up to date with. So it could be kind of reading up, it could be listening to podcasts, it could be reading books, it could be taking some uh, leadership courses, it could be any of those depending on what is important for you. It could be technical training, it could be other things. That is one. And then important part of all of that is exercising those. So if you take a course and you're like, oh, I know this skill, that's enough, that's not good enough. So I spend a lot of time, like you'll see me on Kaggle, you'll see me places of randomly like doing something, just trying out something new, or publishing something in my GitHub or other places, even like years after that, right? So I will learn something, I will try out something, I'll deploy something, I will learn from that experience. And that is from my own, like the remaining 10% of the time. And some of those 10% of the time is aspirational stuff. So sometimes there is a new thing that comes out. For example, Microsoft announced their quantum Q sharp. So I took the course of that, like understanding what that is, how quantum Q sharp can be deployed, how can we use a machine learning model over there to use the technology that's there, how you use a notebook in there, actually run it on a simulator, what does an end-to-end looks
Mm.
like. And I might never use it in my career, let's say in my full-time job, but it's something that if a conversation comes up, or if something that is related in future, it would be good for me to just know or keep tabs on, right? So these are the things that you kind of that's a few ways I've done. And then at the end of the day, like connecting with the right folks in the area. If you're really passionate about something and that's not something you know
Mhm.
right now, connect with the folks who are experts in that, follow them, understand like places where they are, go to conferences, connect with them. Those are some ways that definitely I've kept up to kind of the standards, and like make sure I'm learning and growing and doing the right
Yeah,
things.
thanks for sharing that. I think that's very important to not just take the course, but also build a hands-on project. So you have the experience. That's how you actually learn. I think that's very important. So when you mentor people, what are the kind of most common questions they ask you, and what's your best advice for them?
Yeah, I think for the mentoring, it's very kind of personal, safe space where people ask a lot of different types of questions. But I think the common patterns I see is a lot of career advice, specifically in a situation where they want to understand if this is enough or they should be doing more, or understanding a particular challenge that they're seeing. How can I overcome this? It could be a personal challenge, it could be a team challenge, a process challenge, or something else. A lot of time my advice is two or three fold. Is making sure that they are accountable for their goals in a sense. So as a mentor, I look at like understanding what their immediate goals are, where their gaps are, and how can I help them get there, right? So I ask a lot of poking questions into those. I try to understand a little bit more on what are they looking for, right? And what are the gaps there? If you don't know what you don't know, like in a sense of where you're going, you will never end up there, right? So I try to kind of help direct some of those things to understand, if you know these three skills, what is the one thing that's missing in your profile? How can you learn that? So a lot of advice is on that. The other type of advice is usually about kind of what are the areas that they can be kind of better. So time management is something that comes up from time to time. A lot of people suffer with like understanding how can I do more, or how can I do better with my time management. So I definitely mention a lot of skills, a lot of techniques that I've worked or I've done in my career. And then one last piece of advice is usually like leadership level. So as I mentioned earlier on this call, to me it's about that mindset. It's not about a title. So I talk a lot about that to folks, that you can be a leader no matter what level you are in. This is how you can show up at your work, show up as a leader at your work. These are some advices, several books I mentioned a few times. One of my favorite books is Multipliers. It's a very kind of good book. There's another one which talks about how to win friends and influence people. So that's something I think every engineer should read, because they usually are heads down in their coding. So I do mention that to a lot of folks as well.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
just a lot of advice around different areas and doing that.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the time management. Can you share? Are there any books you recommend, or what are some tips you usually share with folks?
Yeah. So time management wise, I think the biggest tip for me is, if you're taking one thing on your plate, take one thing out in order to balance that. So I do a lot of work, like I have a full-time job, I have kids, I have volunteer work, I do A lot of those things. So one of the only ways that I can stay sane is that if I'm taking up a new role or new opportunity, either volunteer or other work, otherwise in work or a new project, I have to look at my existing plate and see what is equivalent of
Mm.
that I can take off. If I can't take off, then I'll say no, I'm not available. I don't have the time to take up this opportunity at this time, and be
Yeah.
courageous to say no. Right? I think that's another problem. A lot of people say yes, yes, yes. So having that is important. That's the biggest kind of advice. On the second thing that I do, I'm very organized. So I actually look at my weekly to kind of monthly level in some shape or form to look at like what are my top 2 3 things that I need to focus on this week. And every few days I just check in into that to see if I'm on track on achieving that. And if midweek or mid month the goals have changed or shifted, I'll go back and I'll revise that goals. I'll go back and do that. Oh, this, and then I'll also do kind of retrospective,
Mm.
like how you do for products. I do it for myself, like if I'm doing
Yeah.
in the right direction. Because that is the only way you can keep up with the demand and everything that's coming up. I do have this whiteboard next to me where I have my to-dos mentioned and tick mark. I'm very organized around that with different colorings and all of that. I do have
Very
Trello
nice.
boards for myself, like just
Mhm.
one version of everything because it's not just like it's my personal stuff. It's other stuff. There kids stuff. There's so much stuff. So I think and then I mentioned about the 4Ds, right? So anything that comes to you, think from that lens what you need to do, what you need to delete, what you need to defer, what you need to delegate. Those are some advice
Yeah,
for
that's a
time
great
management.
advice. I think I need to create a Trello board for myself. It's sometimes I know those are the things that are important to me, but sometimes on the over the weekend I already feel tired. It's so hard to bring myself to actually do it. But every time I do it, I know the next week usually I'm more productive. And also when you have things planned, your mind is not, it's feeling, it has a little bit more certainty. You know, those are the things you want to do this week. So you don't have the anxiety, oh, am I missing something? So, and then it doesn't have to take a lot of time, maybe just half an hour. Like if you don't have to plan everything, but like you mentioned, have a one or two priorities, have a theme for this week, for a month, and also check in with that. And if it's hard to do that on your own, you can have a friend to do that together with you, keep each other accountable. I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, I just add one thing to that. I think it's okay if you're not able to
Mm-hmm.
keep up, right? It's okay to forgive yourself. I do give this advice to a lot of folks, and it's me myself is to be kind, right? To be kind to yourself because it's okay. There are so many ups and downs that comes and go in your life. There could be external factors that can change the way you're feeling that day. So your mental health is the top priority, right?
Yeah.
Anything else is afterwards. If you're not okay, it's okay to be not okay. So I
Mm-hmm.
do talk about that a lot to my mentees as well, in a sense that it's okay if you're not able to keep up, then you just regroup. In a sense, you take that break
Mm-hmm.
that you need, and then you start from like the next time when you're energized and you can go to that. But yeah, and then that checkpoint, keep it as small as, because if you make it like longer, you're not going to keep up. This is something I learned through experience, that if you take a lot of time in planning, I literally spend like 5 minutes a day on that, like not more than that, or in a week maybe 15 minutes at max.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Kind of end of week if I'm doing. So just quickly see, oh, these are 6 things I had to do, but this I totally forgot. Oh, I need to follow up on this one or something. Just having something going on over there, that would be a good starting point. And over time you'll see things will come and go in that list. You will not be able to achieve few things. It's okay. Just be kind.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I think sometimes we're overachievers. We are too hard on ourselves, and also I like that it doesn't have to be complicated. Kind of taking the similar approach in how you develop the model. Just start with something very simple, the easy, the simple, the available. You can make it easier for you to stick to it. Um, so, before we wrap up, what do you think about the future of the data science and machine learning field?
Yeah, I think data science, few years back, a lot of people were thinking, oh, data science is the thing to go and enter, and it was like hard barrier to entry in
Mhm.
a sense. Still, a lot of people are doing that and learning and switching. To me, in future, when I look, I think most of the tech field will be doing some kind of data science, one shape, way or form, because we will have these things advanced enough where every product has some aspect of advanced
Mhm.
intelligence in it. If you look today, I say this to my kids, right? Um, we couldn't have imagined a world where you will just come home and say, Google, hey Google, or hey Alexas, or hey Siri, or whatever, hey Cortana, this is what I want to do. And it was so funny. My kids, like one day, it's just a funny story. We went to a restaurant. One of my youngest one, she was 2 years old, and she enters to say, she says loudly, "Hey Alexa, can you please change the music?" And we were laughing like anything because she doesn't
Yeah.
know that this is not something coming up. So it's a different world there already in, right? So when I look at this is a long answer to this, when I look into the future, I see a future where it would be part of our everyday life way more than it is today.
Mhm.
Everything that we touch, like smart homes to smart uh, all of that, it would be incorporated. Decision making processes, all of that, there would be a lot of more places. We're already seeing the AI advancements in almost every field. So there's no field in the future where I see, like any industry or any field, where there wouldn't be penetration into this. I do believe in a future where a lot of it will be on the edge. So a lot of IoT based, like a
Mhm.
lot of things like which are very single point, like things that you touch and feel and use every single day, would have a lot of embedded intelligence into them. And then there's an interesting area where we are talking about space and whatnot. So that's something, a discussion for some later time. But I do see there's a lot of advancement that we will be beyond Earth as well. I think there's a lot happening in that space. So yeah, future has a bunch of data science, bunch of AI, bunch of machine learning. If you have those skills, if you understand data, if you understand data problems, just keep working on those, learn from your experiences, and your future is
Mhm.
definitely bright.
Yeah. And what is something right now in your life or your career that you're excited about?
I think the most exciting part is, like, since I switched to this side, right? I think it's learning from the
Mhm.
experience, especially the strategy piece. This was something that I did not know before, so I'm excited to learn to be better at the same point, I'm anxious as well because industry is moving at a very fast pace, right? So it's important to keep up to speed with that. So that makes me a little bit nervous. At the same time, if it's too comfortable, it's not good enough for me, right? So having that urge of going and learning something interesting, it's something great. So I'm really looking forward to where this industry is going, and looking from that lens of innovation, looking from the lens of what strategies look like in this space, and how can we make our product better for consumers who are using these
Mhm.
every single day, especially developers. That's
Yeah.
really exciting.
And you previously mentioned that you're also doing a lot of volunteering. I know you have very uh, busy full-time job. What are some other side project volunteering you're doing?
Yeah, so I do I do volunteer at Anita.org, which is the largest women in tech network, as their Seattle community chapter lead. I do lead a Women Who Code cloud chapter, so that's also kind of as a volunteer, working with different cloud professionals. And then at Microsoft, I recently took a role of the largest ERG, which is the Employee Resource Group, which is Women at Microsoft. So I took the co-chair role of that, which means that I kind of work on the programs for all of the kind of the women groups in
Mhm.
Microsoft. So it's a central ERG, which is huge. So I started this month on that. At the same point, at the same time, I'm looking forward to see like how I can learn from those experiences to make our workplace more inclusive, more diverse, and make sure every gender kind of thrives regardless of where they come from, what their background is. So those three I currently kind of on my plate, and a few others that I've done in the past. So you mentioned in my intro, like Pakistani women in computing. I'm still a very kind of honorable kind of member of that community that I built. So I moved on to give to a new president. So I'm kind of currently as an advisor in that. So that is a community that we built. Really passionate to volunteer from time to time there as well. But that's other kind of my passion. So coming from Pakistan, that's another passion that I have, to make sure Pakistani women have the right access and resources as well. So yeah, those are some, and then there's a bunch of other mentoring, one to one, and other things that I do depending on different relationships with some universities here as well, and other programs, especially AI programs. So I'm a mentor in Girls in AI program with UNICEF and few other places that do several things. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
awesome. And for folks who want to follow your journey, where can I find you online?
Yeah, they will find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. My LinkedIn is mostly active, I would say, so they can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn, and Twitter as well. Twitter is not so active, but I try to be sometimes. So those are two places that they can find me, and there is a Linktree link that I can definitely share with you, where there are other places they can find the work that I do. But those are two places. LinkedIn,
Great.
definitely.
I'll add it to the notes. I had a great conversation with Muazma today, and I learned so much from you, and look forward to hearing the next steps from your journey.
Thank you so much, Daliana.